All right, so here's a tutorial on how to do the lino cutting. So the first thing you want to do is you want to start off with a sketch of your design. Make sure your design does not have a lot of really, really tiny details. It needs to be small enough, or it needs to be bold enough to be able to outline it with a Sharpie. So you're just going to draw your whole design. Make sure it's going to be able to fit on the size of your stamp. Here I'm doing about a 2-inch stamp, and I did include words. What you're going to do is you're going to cut it out and then press it against the stamp. And the graphite will rub off onto the rubber stamp. So after you're done doing this, you're just going to outline it with a thick Sharpie. Notice that the words, whenever you transferred it, they appear backwards. That is correct. You want to make sure that any words or writing or numbers are backwards on your image, because whenever you stamp it, it's going to reverse everything. So that's why it's helpful if you draw it first on a piece of scrap paper and then just press it to transfer. Some tips on the lino cutters is that they have like these little wedge-shaped tips that this is the part that's going to cut, and this is the part that you can cut deep to. You want to make sure you don't cut too deep because you don't want to tear through the stamp all the way. My suggestion is outlining your image first and then removing the excess, going very, very slow. If it helps, flip your stamp over and do the back of it first before you do the front, and just kind of give it a couple test pushes. It cuts very, very smooth and very, very easily. So do a couple practice scratches and a couple practice curves before you get started. That way you know that you feel comfortable with the stamp, and then you can flip it over and start on the other side. All right, so for example, if I was to cut this out, I would very, very carefully hold it as carefully as I can. Don't cut towards yourself, because even though these things seem like they're not that sharp, they are very sharp and they will cause a lot of damage to your finger. So do not cut towards you. Make sure you always cut away from you. Rotate the stamp if you need to, okay? So for example, if I was going to cut this out, I'm going to look, it's kind of almost like I'm looking down sights. I'm going to look and see where the hole is. So like if I'm on the black part, I don't want to push there, but if I'm on the gray part, that's how I can tell where I'm at. So I'm going to be looking down the sights of the lino cutter. I'm just going to very gently push down and push very, very slowly. This cuts super easily, so you don't want to go too fast. Whenever you get to the end of your cut line, you can either tilt it back and then push up so it cuts it, or you can just rotate it and cut it from the opposite direction in order to cut it so that it removes pretty easily. You might have to use your finger to help you tear it. Sorry, I was just using black paint. I got some under my nails. Anyway, so just very carefully cut it out, okay? So then I would go ahead and resume. Now, if you have something that's rounded, you might have to use your other hand to rotate it as you push. So I'm just gonna very gently start where I left off. Just gonna very gently push a tiny bit and then rotate, push, rotate, and keep doing that until you get all the way around the edge so that you don't risk damaging that rounded surface, okay? So notice I'm just doing a very tiny bit at a time before I call it quits. When I get to the end, you might be able to just pull it off too, if it's easy enough, or you could just, once again, push and cut until you get it off. All right, so now, as you can see, the outside edge is completely removed. Now I would want to focus on the inside edge. So for this, I see that there's like a little line that I want to be very careful not to damage. So I'm going to first cut away from that line, once again looking down my sights to make sure I'm not damaging the black part. So I'm just going to push and cut until I touch the opposite line, pull back, and then just keep doing that until I get to the opposite line, over and over, just so that I can try to cut that out. And then whenever I think that I've got everything cut out that I need to, then I can just go ahead and start pushing around the edges. Just make sure that you're always trying to push away from the line if you're in a tight spot like this, instead of towards the line, because that'll make it a lot easier. And then whenever you're satisfied, you just go down the edges until you get the edge cut, and then you should be able to remove the inside pieces. If you struggle, just try to do it again very carefully, very slowly, until you have removed the insides. A good way to test it or check to see how much you got removed, or if you removed the right amount, is taking a Sharpie or a thick tool and then just rubbing it over the top surface to see how much more you still need to remove. So if I take a thick Sharpie and I very carefully just kind of pet across, it shows me how much I have already removed and how much I should remove more of. So here I can see that maybe this bottom part's a little bit on the thick side, so then I can push again and try to make it a little bit thinner until I have that chunk removed, and that'll get it closer to what I want my actual design to be. So feel free to practice on the back of your stamp until you feel comfortable. Once you feel comfortable, then you may start on the front. Remember, you do not have to cut very far down. You're just removing the very top surface layer, and that's all you need to remove in order to make it a stamp. So go very slow, go very carefully. Sorry, I keep getting my picture off on the side, but anyway, so go very slow and carefully, making sure that you do not damage the black lines. You'll notice there's a bunch of extra space kind of in some other areas. On those areas, just very carefully and steady continue to remove those particular parts. Some advice I could give you is that if you have any areas that are like really, really tight, make sure that you're using the proper lino cutter. Some lino cutters have different tips. This one that I'm using is the V tip. Some are what are called the square tip or the point tip. So there's a bunch of different types of lino cutters you can use. Just ask for the type that would be best for yours, and I can help you. I'd be more than happy to help you pick out which one would work the best for you. So notice that I'm constantly rotating my stamp. That is very important. In this particular area, notice that I'm using an X-Acto knife. That's because I have a lot of really, really tiny areas to get to. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting at an angle with an X-Acto knife and then cutting in the opposite direction with, once again, an angle with an X-Acto knife in order to get those really, really tiny areas, because I made it way too small for my lino cutter to be able to fit easily. So that is an option. I will get forewarning, that is a very hard option to do, because if you don't get the angle just right, you might accidentally cut more than what you meant to. But if you want to go for it, then just ask me. More than happy to help one-on-one show you how to do that particular part. But anyway, notice that I switched back to my lino cutter because the X-Acto knife was really challenging, and I wanted to go back to my lino because it's a lot easier to do than the box cutter. But so notice here I'm just slowly removing more chunks because I wanted that bottom part of his face to be very bright. So I moved quite a bit of that and just removing a chunk at a time. You can tell if you look at it, those raised surfaces, if it's raised, then it's probably going to end up showing up on the print, so you might have to consider that as you are going, and make sure that you're removing any raised surfaces that you don't want to show up on your print. So notice with the letters, I'm going very, very carefully, very, very slowly in order to not damage those, and then here I am just removing the insides of the little twinkly star bits in order to make them show up. So on this part, I'm just using a knife to cut. You can also use a pair of scissors to remove the outside. You can either just cut off the top surfaces, or what I'm doing here, just because it was easier, is I'm just literally cutting off the pieces that I don't need. All right, when you're done, I like to rub a Sharpie over the top surface so I can see which parts I missed or which parts are too high raised that I need to cut a little deeper, and then I'm just trimming up those excess areas. So you can see some parts that I needed to go back and fix. And then whenever you're done, you're just going to get a sponge, or you can even use a brayer roller. And then you're just going to sponge on some ink or paint. And then afterwards, you just get a piece of paper. And then you're just going to press your stamp down onto the paper. You can use a tool, or you can use your hand. I'm just using my hand to push it really hard against it. And you peel it off, and then you are done. And that is how you make a stamp. So you can see a couple prints that I made. Sometimes your print won't always come out as great as others, so that's the good thing about this, is you can use this over and over. As long as you take care of it, you can use it for as many times as you possibly can, and it's kind of fun to be able to stamp some things. So go out there, make your mark, and have fun with making stamps.